Okay. Welcome everyone again. This is a runtime discussion of the CDS action execution. So once we create our actions, right, the next thing we have to do is be able to execute those actions. Like all the CDS designer steps are done in design time. The execution is a runtime activity. So here you can see what we're doing first is we're saying what is our package name, what is the device instance we want to execute the package. And in this case, the UI was only hard-coded to one specific action that it was executing. It was base configuration. But as you know, we allow multiple actions with a package. So it's not going to be just one action. It will be any action the user can execute from. So when the user selects the action he wants to execute, right, he has to populate the input form, right? What are the required inputs? And you can know that when we create an action, we can have multiple template and mapping files for a given action. So we have a backend API that will return to us all the required inputs the user needs to provide in order to execute an action. Okay? So once he enters the required input information, then he'll be able to execute that action itself. And there are two steps as part of execution of that action. The first step is that you can execute that action by first previewing the configuration that is generated, because we first will do resource resolution based on the input data, based on all the capabilities we are resolving through CDS Designer resource resolution component. So once we're able to generate the configlet, we can preview that configlet, or the next step will be to execute it in the network. So that could be one scenario. Or the other scenario is that we don't need to show the configlet preview, we just execute it in the network, whatever we generate as the configlet. So you can see here we have the configlet, with previewing in this case the actual content before execution. We also have resource resolution. This is a tab that shows all the resolved data. All the data that was resolved by input, defaults, SDNC, MDSAL, or like naming microservice or netbox microservice. Okay, so this will show those resolved data information. And then we have basically ask yourself, is this configlet valid for deployment? So in this use case, the user had to validate the configlet is valid before deploying into the network. Once you click on that ask yourself check mark, you'll be able to deploy that configlet into the device itself. And you can see,
what if it's not valid? I don't see any back button or how to make it more validated.
So if it's not valid, there's two choices. We need to support a cancel button or back button you're talking about, or the user changes his resource resolution data by resolving a capability that wasn't resolved, and then regenerating the configlet, and then be able to deploy it. But you're right. If it's not valid, we need to be able to either cancel it or be able to change the context to generate a valid configlet.
And that changes will be within the designer or the package itself?
No, it has to be within the runtime. So you're not changing. So it could be. So there's two cases, okay? The case where you have a valid template, but the data was not resolved for some reason, because maybe the backend API failed or the data is not there. So for those cases, you want to make sure you are able to provide that data. If the template is not valid, then you have to go back to the package and correct the template. Okay, so in here you can see I click on ask yourself, and then I deploy the configlet, and you see you have deployment status logs. So what we definitely want to do is support a diary for device, like all the transactions that are executed, um, and not allow transactions to be executed if there is one in progress, right? So you don't want to you want to kind of have a request management type of system and a diary system of all the transactions that are executed, all the configlets that are generated, so you know what they are, and be able to see the logs and the history of what was changed in the network uh, within this specific system.
So you mentioned that we cannot deploy if there are some other actions is deployed in the background.
If for this device, if you are doing, let's say, a request already, you can deploy it, but we'll have to put it on queue. Okay, so either we say there is one request that can go in, or we allow multiple requests, but uh, we have to make sure we can handle it by having some queue mechanism.
Okay, so we can mention that it will be in the queue, but it will run automatically after the previous one.
Correct.
Okay. For the validation here, can we stop it from the designer itself? We can disable the option to the runtime if this is not valid from the very first beginning of the package.
Repeat your question.
I mean the validation here. You mentioned that we for some case we need to go back to the package.
Yeah.
To do some changes. So why don't we stop the runtime itself from the package if it's not valid?
How would you know?
And how would you know here?
Well, you can. The way you know is you'll cancel it, right, and go change it.
I mean, why don't we do the validation before we support the runtime?
Right. I agree. If we can allow this execution as part of the, package itself, because all of this should have been validated before you, as part of your design time, before you execute sometime in the runtime, right? But in some cases, it's you may think it's right, but it's wrong because maybe something was missed. So.
Something works.
Can you say it
I'm
again?
sorry, Yuri. Yeah. Can you say it again? The last part.
Oh, I was trying to just say that in some cases, all the validation should have been done in design. Okay, all cases. But some cases, you might miss it. You might think you did all the validation with a valid template and everything you tested, but something could have gone wrong, or something you could have missed. So in those cases, you want to be able to go back to the design time itself and be able to correct it. Or it could happen where you can have different devices having different software version and they require different packages to be deployed. So you might have two different valid packages, but they're valid for the specific version of device instances.
Yeah.
So it's very hard. It could, if we try to add validation, it could be very hard to say when we apply it, when not to apply it. So I think we should keep that in the back of our minds and think about it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I see you are running out of time for the next meeting.
Yes. So let's
Okay.
let me stop the recording and